Hello and welcome. The weight of stone presses down from every direction in the deep places of the world. Miles of rock separate you from sunlight, from fresh air, from anything remotely familiar. Down here, in the perpetual darkness of the Underdark, evolution has carved out horrors that surface dwellers can scarcely comprehend. But among the countless predators that lurk in these lightless depths, some stand apart not through sheer power or numbers, but through their uncanny ability to deceive, to mimic, and to strike when you least expect it. Tonight, we descend into the black to examine 5 creatures so rare, so unusual, that even veteran delvers might traverse the Underdark for years without encountering them. These are not the mind flayers you have heard whispered about in taverns, nor the floating spheres of death that populate adventurer nightmares. These are the strange ones, the forgotten ones, the creatures that lurk in the deepest corners of the subterranean realms. Section 1, the Cloaker. The first of these peculiar predators makes its home in caverns so vast that sound echoes for minutes before fading into silence. You enter such a chamber now, your torch casting weak light against walls that disappear into shadow overhead. The ceiling, you estimate, must be at least 80 or 90 feet above you. Stalactites hang like stone fangs, and for a moment, you admire their strange beauty. One near the entrance catches your eye particularly. It seems to flutter slightly in the faint air current. Then you realize something terrifying. Stone does not flutter. Stone does not breathe. And stone certainly does not unfold leathery wings and drop toward you with a shriek that freezes your blood. The creature descending upon you is a cloaker, one of the Underdark's most sinister ambush predators. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a large cloak or manta ray floating through the air. Its body, a flat expanse of dark leather, spanning 8 to 10 feet from wingtip to wingtip. But this is no simple beast. The cloaker possesses an alien intelligence, a cunning that allows it to identify and exploit the weaknesses of its prey with disturbing efficiency. Its body is primarily a deep black or dark brown, though some specimens display mottled patterns that help them blend even more effectively with stone surfaces. The texture of its hide resembles worn leather or bat wings, tough enough to turn aside poorly aimed blade strikes, yet flexible enough to wrap around victims like a suffocating blanket. When you observe a cloaker from below, as most victims do in their final moments, you notice the pale underside that contrasts sharply with its dark upper surface. This underside is covered with dozens of small gripping appendages, evolutionary tools designed for one purpose. Grappling at the head of this nightmarish creature, if you can call it a head, sits a wide mouth filled with sharp teeth. The teeth are not massive, but they do not need to be. Once the cloaker has wrapped itself around you, restricting your movement and cutting off your air supply, those teeth methodically shred flesh and muscle. The tail of the creature extends several feet behind its body, ending in a barbed whip that delivers slashing strikes to disoriented prey. But the physical form of the cloaker, disturbing as it may be, represents only part of its arsenal. This creature possesses abilities that seem almost supernatural, powers that have led scholars to debate whether cloakers originated in the material plane at all. The most notorious of these abilities manifests as a moan that emanates from the creature's body. This moan operates at frequencies that affect living creatures in various ways, depending on how the cloaker modulates it. The creature can vary the intensity and nature of this sound to produce different effects, depending on its tactical needs. One variation of this moan induces overwhelming fear in those who hear it. Not the natural caution that keeps sensible creatures alive in dangerous environments, but primal, mind-shattering terror that sends even battle-hardened warriors fleeing in panic. You might have faced dragons, you might have stared down demons, but when the cloaker's fear moan washes over you, your conscious mind shuts down. Your body acts on pure instinct, running blindly through the darkness, likely straight into another predator's territory, or off a cliff edge into some bottomless chasm. Another variation causes intense nausea and disorientation. Your stomach churns, your vision blurs, and you struggle to maintain your footing as the world seems to spin around you. In this state, you become easy prey, unable to defend yourself or flee effectively. Accounts from those who have studied these creatures suggest that cloakers may possess additional moan variations. Some reports describe a low-level moan that causes nervousness and mental numbness in those exposed for extended periods, while others mention an effect that leaves victims entranced and motionless. The full range of the cloaker's sonic capabilities remains poorly understood, as few who experience all variations survive to document them. Beyond the moan, cloakers demonstrate remarkable skill at creating illusory duplicates of themselves. In an instant, a single cloaker can appear to be multiple identical creatures, all swooping and diving through the air. These images possess enough substance to seem real until attacked, at which point they vanish. The illusions serve multiple purposes in the cloaker's hunting strategy. They confuse and divide groups of prey, making coordinated defense nearly impossible. They mask the true location of the real cloaker, turning every swing of a weapon into a gamble. And they create a psychological effect, a sense of being overwhelmed by numbers that can break the morale of even disciplined, adventuring parties. The intelligence behind these tactics cannot be overstated. Cloakers possess intellect comparable to the average human, making them far more than mindless beasts that rely solely on instinct. They observe their prey before attacking, noting weapons, armor, group dynamics, and apparent magical abilities. A cloaker might shadow a group through several chambers, hanging motionless against ceilings or walls, studying how the adventurers react to threats. When it finally strikes, it does so with a plan. It targets spellcasters first, wrapping them in its smothering embrace before they can unleash destructive magic. It uses its pheromone to scatter groups, isolating individuals for easier consumption. It creates illusions to draw attacks away from its true position, conserving its energy while opponents exhaust themselves. Scholars who have studied cloakers, usually from the safety of well-lit libraries far from the Underdark, debate the creature's origins. Some ancient texts suggest that cloakers may have arrived in the material plane from the Shadowfell, the plane of darkness and shadow. This theory finds support in the cloaker's ability to manipulate shadow through its illusions, and its capacity to blend seamlessly with stone that has never known sunlight. The creature's sensitivity to bright light also suggests a possible connection to realms of eternal darkness. Other researchers propose that cloakers evolved naturally in the deepest reaches of the Underdark, that they represent what happens when predatory creatures adapt to an environment of absolute darkness and scarce prey. Without definitive evidence, the true origin of these aberrations remains a mystery. What we do know with certainty is that cloakers have existed in the Underdark for millennia. Ancient dwarven records from early deep mining operations mention creatures that match the description of cloakers perfectly. These records describe attacks on mining camps where workers were found smothered beneath leathery wings, their bodies drained of blood and flesh partially devoured. The dwarves learned to recognize the warning signs of cloaker territory: caverns with unusually high ceilings, but few other inhabitants; the complete absence of bats, which cloakers hunt eagerly; a peculiar smell in the air, musky and slightly sweet, that could suggest the creature's presence. Drow histories, recorded in the flowing script of Undercommon on cavern walls throughout their cities, also reference cloakers extensively. The Dark Elves call them Gonador's cloaks in some regions, linking the creatures to one of the dark powers they acknowledge. Whether this connection represents actual divine influence or merely the drow tendency to associate threatening creatures with their pantheon remains unclear. What is clear is that even drow, masters of the Underdark with centuries of experience hunting its dangers, treat cloakers with respect and caution. Some drow believe it brings bad luck to kill a cloaker unless absolutely necessary, a superstition that may have practical roots in the creature's tendency to hunt in small groups. Cloakers are not entirely solitary creatures. despite often appearing to hunt alone. They gather in small groups, sometimes called flocks or shadows by those who study them, that claim territories spanning many square miles. Within this territory, individual cloakers stake out prime hunting grounds, usually large caverns with high ceilings and multiple entrance passages where prey naturally funnels through. They tolerate each other's presence and may even cooperate when facing threats too dangerous for a single cloaker to handle. The social structure of such groups defies easy categorization, though older cloakers that have survived for decades in the harsh Underdark environment naturally accumulate authority through demonstrated wisdom. Reproduction among cloakers remains one of the more mysterious aspects of their biology. The creatures do reproduce, as evidenced by juvenile specimens occasionally encountered, but the specific mechanisms remain poorly documented. This gap in knowledge stems from the difficulty of observing these secretive creatures during what must be vulnerable reproductive periods. Based on limited observations, young cloakers remain with adults for an extended period, learning hunting techniques and the sophisticated use of their sonic and illusory abilities. This extended period of learned behavior speaks to the complexity of cloaker society and the importance of education in their hunting success. The diet of an adult cloaker consists primarily of warm-blooded creatures, though they can subsist on various organic matter if desperate. They prefer mammals and humanoids, finding such prey ideal for their metabolism. When feeding, cloakers prove remarkably efficient. They engulf their prey completely, using their body to contain the victim while they feed. The process is neither quick nor pleasant for the victim. After feeding, a cloaker seeks out a suitable resting location, usually a high ceiling in a chamber away from heavy traffic, where it hangs while digesting its meal. Cloakers maintain complex relationships with other Underdark creatures, relationships based largely on mutual avoidance or careful coexistence. They consider mind flayers particularly dangerous, not because the illithids pose a direct physical threat, but because a cloaker's alien mind offers uncertain protection against psionic assault. Mind flayers, for their part, view cloakers as unpredictable creatures whose thoughts operate on frequencies difficult for even powerful psionics to read clearly. The two species generally give each other wide berth. Beholders, the other common Underdark overlords, sometimes form limited partnerships with groups of cloakers. The Beholders appreciate having additional ambush predators in their territory, while cloakers benefit from the safety that comes with a Beholder's protection. Such arrangements remain fragile, however, liable to collapse if either party perceives the other as a threat. Duergar, the gray dwarves who make their fortresses in the Underdark's middle reaches, actively hunt cloakers for their hides. A properly tanned cloaker hide creates exceptional leather that retains some of the creature's natural ability to blend with shadows, making it valuable for armor. Duergar armorers prize these hides enough to pay substantial bounties to hunters who bring them intact specimens. The hunting of cloakers requires specialized tactics and considerable bravery. Duergar hunting parties typically use nets, long spears, and crossbows to bring down these aerial predators. Even restrained, a cloaker remains extremely dangerous, and hunting parties expect casualties. In the ecology of the Underdark, cloakers occupy a crucial niche as apex predators of open caverns. They keep populations of herbivores and smaller predators in check, preventing any single species from overwhelming the delicate balance that exists in these lightless realms. Their presence in a cave system indicates a relatively stable and mature ecosystem, as cloakers require consistent prey populations to sustain their numbers. Conversely, the disappearance of cloakers from an area that previously supported them suggests either environmental catastrophe or the arrival of a more dominant predator. Adventurers who survive encounters with cloakers often describe the experience as more psychologically traumatic than physically damaging. Something about the creatures unnerves humanoids on a fundamental level. They fly without traditional wings. Their intelligence operates in ways that seem alien. And their moans, those strange vibrations that affect the body in unsettling ways, leave lasting impressions. Some survivors report nightmares for years afterward, dreams of being smothered by living darkness while unable to scream or move. The rarity of cloakers in more accessible regions of the Underdark stems from several factors. First, they require very specific environmental conditions to thrive. Caverns must be large enough to accommodate their hunting style, but sized appropriately for ambush tactics. Temperature and humidity must fall within ranges the creatures find comfortable. Second, cloakers face intense competition from other apex predators for prime hunting territory. A cave system that could support cloakers might also attract a mined flayer colony or beholder. And cloakers generally cannot compete with such powers. Third, their reproduction appears to be slow, meaning population losses take extended periods to recover. Despite these limitations, cloakers persist in the deepest, most remote sections of the Underdark. Some scholars estimate that only a few thousand individual cloakers may exist in all the subterranean realms, though such numbers remain purely speculative. No one has ever conducted a proper census of these elusive predators, and given their talent for camouflage and avoidance, no one likely ever will. What we know for certain is that cloakers remain one of the Underdark's most efficient and terrifying predators, creatures well adapted to their lightless domain. As you stand in that vast cavern, torch held high, the cloaker that descended toward you abruptly changes course. It has detected something that gives it pause. Perhaps you wear armor of a type it does not recognize, suggesting unknown defenses. Perhaps your companions have entered the chamber behind you, making you less appealing prey. Or perhaps this particular cloaker simply decided that you pose more threat than you are worth as a meal. Whatever the reason, it sweeps past you close enough that you feel the wind of its passage, then vanishes into the shadows above. Your torch reveals nothing but stone and darkness. But somewhere overhead, patient and silent, the cloaker waits. It has all the time in the world, and down here in the eternal night, time is the one resource that never runs short. Section 2, The Roper. You move deeper into the Underdark, leaving the cavern of the cloaker behind. The passages narrow here, forcing you to walk single file as walls of rough stone press close on either side. Eventually, the tunnel opens into another chamber, this one smaller than the last, but no less ominous. Your light plays across formations of stalagmites, rising from the floor like teeth in some enormous jaw. Mineral deposits have created bizarre shapes over countless centuries, pillars of stone that seem almost intentional in their placement. One formation in particular draws your attention. It stands roughly 9 feet tall, cone-shaped with a wider base that narrows toward the top. Its surface covered in the same gray and brown mineral striations that decorate the rest of the chamber. You approach it cautiously, admiring the way water has sculpted the stone into unusual textures and patterns. Then the stone opens an eye. What you mistook for mineral deposits are actually protrusions covering living flesh. What appeared to be weathering and erosion patterns are actually the natural texture of the creature's hide. And what you assumed was a harmless geological formation is in fact a roper, one of the Underdark's most patient and deadly ambush predators. Before you can react, thick tendrils erupt from the creature's body. These appendages shoot toward you with terrifying speed, each ending in a sticky pad that adheres to whatever it touches. Armor, skin, clothing, shields, it matters not. Once a roper's tendril attaches to you, pulling free requires strength that few possess. The roper stands as perhaps the ultimate expression of ambush predation in the Underdark, where the cloaker relies on mobility and psychological warfare. The roper depends entirely on patience and perfect camouflage. An adult roper averages between 8 and 10 feet in height, with a roughly conical body shape that mimics stalagmites with uncanny precision. The base of the creature measures 6 to 8 feet in diameter, providing stability and housing most of its vital organs, while the upper portion narrows to a diameter of perhaps 3 feet. The surface of a roper's body appears to be stone, feels like stone when touched carefully, and even sounds like stone when struck with a weapon. Yet beneath this rocky exterior lies muscle, sinew, and organs that function according to biological principles, strange to surface-dwelling creatures. The coloration of a roper varies, depending on the geological formations common to its habitat. In limestone caverns, ropers display pale grays and whites with yellowish undertones. In basalt regions, they adopt darker grays and blacks, with occasional rust-colored streaks from iron deposits. In areas rich with mineral veins, ropers may exhibit blues, greens, or even pinkish hues that perfectly match the surrounding stone. This chameleonic ability appears to develop over time as the creature remains in one location, its hide gradually taking on the characteristics of nearby rock formations. A roper relocated to a new environment initially stands out as different from the local geology, but given sufficient time in one place, it becomes virtually indistinguishable from natural formations. The eye of a roper, singular because the creature possesses only one, represents its most obvious weak point, and the feature most likely to betray its presence to observant prey. This eye measures roughly 8 inches in diameter and sits positioned near the top of the creature's body. The eye itself appears yellow with a horizontal slit pupil, though some specimens display variations in coloring. The roper can close this eye completely when necessary, sealing it behind a plate of stone-like material that renders it invisible. However, doing so blinds the creature, forcing it to rely on other senses. Most ropers keep their eye open, but positioned away from likely approach vectors, watching for prey through peripheral vision, while presenting only blank stone to casual observation. Beyond vision, ropers appear to possess the ability to sense vibrations through solid rock, allowing them to detect movement even when their eye is closed or facing another direction. This sensitivity to tremors through stone provides early warning of anything that moves within their territory. Creatures that fly or levitate through chambers naturally produce less vibration, though even the air displacement from movement creates detectable changes that may alert an attentive roper. The tendrils that serve as the roper's primary weapons deserve examination in detail, for they represent one of the most effective hunting tools in the natural world. A typical roper possesses 6 tendrils, originating from openings in the creature's body, usually positioned around the middle section where the cone shape begins to narrow. In their retracted state, the tendrils remain hidden within the creature's body. When deployed, they can extend up to 50 feet, though most ropers seem to prefer keeping them at shorter ranges to maintain better control. The structure of these tendrils combines tensile strength with flexibility. The outer surface secretes an adhesive compound that activates on contact with organic and inorganic materials alike. This adhesive forms bonds that require tremendous force to break. The substance shows remarkable adhesion properties, bonding strongly to flesh, leather, cloth, and even metal, while somehow avoiding permanent attachment to the roper's own body or the stone surfaces of its environment. When a roper attacks, it does so with calculated precision. The creature demonstrates intelligence comparable to that of certain humanoid individuals, making it capable of assessing threats and planning attacks. It can identify which members of a group carry weapons, which wear heavy armor, and which move with patterns suggesting spell casting abilities. The roper prioritizes threats, launching its first tendrils at anyone capable of dealing significant damage from a distance. Archers, wizards, and clerics find themselves entangled before they realize combat has begun. The roper then addresses melee fighters, leaving less threatening targets for last, or ignoring them entirely if they flee. Each tendril operates with precision, and the roper can maintain concentration on all 6 simultaneously, adjusting their positions and pull strength based on how each target struggles. Once a tendril attaches to prey, the roper begins reeling it in. The creature's tremendous strength allows it to pull multiple victims simultaneously, dragging them inexorably toward its mouth regardless of how they resist. The tendrils not only grapple, but also seem to sap the strength of those caught in their grip, making escape increasingly difficult. The mouth of a roper, positioned near the base of its conical body, opens to reveal rows of grinding teeth designed to crush bone and pulverize flesh. The process of being consumed by a roper is neither quick nor pleasant, as the creature methodically crushes its prey. The intelligence of ropers extends beyond simple hunting instincts. With an intellect comparable to that of orcs, or even some less educated humans, they can learn from experience, adjusting their camouflage and positioning based on previous encounters. They can distinguish between threats and non-threats, between armed warriors and helpless prisoners. They even show capacity for delayed gratification, ignoring small prey in favor of waiting for larger, more nutritious meals. However, ropers show little interest in anything beyond hunting and survival. They do not create tools, do not build structures beyond choosing advantageous positions, and do not engage in complex social behaviors. Their intelligence focuses entirely on ambush predation and survival in the harsh, underdark environment. Habitat selection reveals much about roper ecology and behavior. These creatures strongly prefer chambers where their conical shape allows them to blend with natural stone formations. They avoid vast caverns where they might appear conspicuous and prefer locations with multiple approach routes. allowing prey to enter from various directions, while the roper remains positioned to intercept. Natural choke points, where passages funnel traffic through specific areas, represent ideal roper territory. The creatures can also climb on ceilings and walls, sometimes positioning themselves above rather than below, adding another dimension to their ambush tactics. A roper hanging from a cave ceiling can pull victims upward, and even if they escape the tendrils' grip, they face dangerous falls. The territorial nature of ropers manifests in passive rather than active forms. They do not patrol boundaries or mark their domain with scent or visual signals. Instead, a roper simply establishes itself in a prime location and remains there, feeding on whatever passes by. Based on what we know of their behavior, individual ropers likely maintain hunting territories that they defend from others of their kind, though direct observations of such territorial disputes remain rare. Reproduction among ropers follows a life cycle that many find surprising. In the current understanding of roper biology, creatures called piercers represent the larval stage of ropers. Piercers are small, cone-shaped creatures that attach themselves to cave ceilings and drop onto prey that passes beneath them. These juvenile forms hatch from eggs, which are laid in clutches and adhere to crevices in cave ceilings. The eggs appear glossy and dark, stuck together in groups of 6 to 8. When the eggs hatch, small piercer larvae emerge and immediately begin hunting, targeting insects, bats, and other small creatures. Piercers grow slowly over time, feeding on progressively larger prey as they increase in size. At some point in their development, when conditions prove favorable and they have accumulated sufficient mass, they undergo a transformation. The piercer detaches from its ceiling perch and develops the tendrils, legs, and other features characteristic of an adult roper. This metamorphosis could take years or even decades, depending on food availability and environmental conditions. Sexual maturity appears to occur before the piercer has fully matured into a roper form, suggesting that reproduction can happen at various life stages. The specific mechanisms of roper mating and egg production remain poorly documented, as observing these secretive creatures during reproductive periods proves exceptionally difficult. What we can infer from limited observations is that the life cycle continues through the laying of eggs that develop into piercers, perpetuating the cycle. No parental care appears to occur, with the larvae left to survive on their own from the moment of hatching. The diet of a roper consists of whatever organic matter enters its range. They show no particular preferences, consuming duergar, drow, sverfnablin, goblins, adventurers, and animals with equal efficiency. A roper's metabolism processes food with remarkable efficiency. extracting nutrients from virtually every part of a victim. Only the most indigestible materials, such as metal weapons and armor, gems, and certain magical items, pass through the creature's system. These materials may be expelled, creating small accumulations around a long-established roper's base that serve as warning signs to observant travelers. Between meals, ropers can enter a state of reduced activity that conserves energy while maintaining alertness. Their metabolism slows, and they become even more difficult to distinguish from the lifeless stone they mimic. In this state, a roper can survive for extended periods without food, patiently waiting for prey to wander into range. Interactions between ropers and other Underdark denizens vary widely depending on the species involved. Mind flayers consider ropers beneath their notice, as long as the creatures do not impede illicit activities. A roper blocking a passage that mind flayers wish to use will be destroyed without hesitation. But one positioned away from main routes can exist near a mind flayer colony indefinitely without incident. Beholders view ropers as useful environmental hazards that help protect their lairs from intrusion. Some beholders deliberately leave ropers undisturbed in their territory's outer chambers, essentially using them as living traps. The beholder knows where each roper waits and how to avoid them, while intruders stumble into their grasp. Drow have developed sophisticated methods for dealing with ropers, born from millennia of coexistence in the Underdark's depths. They train certain individuals to detect ropers by probing suspicious formations with long poles or expendable creatures. When a roper reveals itself, the Drow know to either eliminate the threat or reroute around it. Some Drow also recognize the value of roper components for alchemical purposes, though harvesting from such dangerous creatures requires considerable skill and caution. Duergar take a more direct approach, viewing ropers as obstacles to be eliminated rather than avoided. Duergar work crews exploring new tunnels include specialists armed with weapons designed to attack from beyond the roper's tendril reach. They coordinate their attacks, focusing fire on a single roper until it dies or retreats. The Duergar may then harvest useful materials from the corpse for various purposes. Sverfnablin, the deep gnomes who burrow through the Underdark's rock, possess abilities that make finding hidden ropers somewhat easier than for other races. Their natural affinity for stone and ability to detect unusual formations gives them an advantage in identifying ropers before getting within tendril range. Some Sverfnablin communities incorporate known roper locations into their defensive strategies, mapping them carefully to ensure their own people avoid those areas, while potential enemies remain ignorant. The existence of roper variants adds further complexity to an already mysterious species. While standard ropers represent the most common type encountered throughout the Underdark, reports describe regional variations in isolated cave systems. Accounts mention ropers in volcanic regions that display resistance or even immunity to fire, sometimes called Vulkards by those who study such creatures. These variants, composed of basalt-like material rather than granite, thrive in higher temperatures. Whether these represent a distinct subspecies or simply standard ropers adapted to extreme environments through long exposure remains a matter of debate among scholars. Some reports also describe prismatic ropers in regions where magical energy concentrates heavily. These creatures allegedly possess the ability to shift their coloration rapidly, creating hypnotic patterns that attract prey, or using color sprays to blind and stun opponents. Their tendrils supposedly contain potent toxins rather than simple adhesive. However, verified encounters with such creatures remain rare, and many scholars question whether they truly exist or represent misidentified encounters with ropers near magical anomalies. What cannot be disputed is the roper's place as one of the Underdark's most successful and enduring predator species. They have existed in the deep places for ages uncounted, preying on every race and creature that ventures into their domain. They will likely continue existing long after current civilizations crumble, patient and eternal as the stone they so perfectly mimic. Every experienced Underdark traveler knows to examine stalagmites and ceiling formations carefully before passing them. Every survivor of a roper attack remembers the horror of being dragged helpless toward grinding teeth. And every guide worth hiring knows the warning signs. Metallic debris on the ground, chambers with unusually clear sight lines, but perfect hiding spots, and most telling of all, formations that seem just slightly wrong for the local geology. You stand now in that chamber, one of the roper's tendrils wrapped around your leg, feeling the inexorable pull toward its mouth. Your strength drains as the tendril tightens, making your struggles increasingly feeble. Your companions shout and rush forward, weapons raised, hacking at the tendril that holds you. The sticky appendage proves difficult to sever, but eventually their combined efforts cut through it. The roper releases you from that particular tendril, but 4 others still wave through the air, seeking new targets. You scramble back, knowing that the stone itself has become your enemy here in the deep dark. Section 3, the Drider. Your desperate struggles against the roper's tendril cease as your companions finally cut through the adhesive appendage, freeing you from its death grip. You flee that chamber, nursing bruised limbs and wounded pride, pushing deeper into passages that slope ever downward. The air grows thicker here, heavy with moisture and the smell of decay. Webs begin to appear, first as thin strands stretched across corners, then as elaborate constructions that span entire tunnel sections. You recognize the architecture of these webs, the distinctive patterns that mark drow territory. But something feels wrong. The webs show signs of age and neglect, and the passages ahead echo with a skittering sound that raises the hair on your neck. 8 legs moving in synchronized rhythm against stone. Too large to be ordinary spiders, too purposeful to be mindless beasts. A figure emerges from the shadows ahead, and you freeze. The torso appears drow, unmistakably so, with obsidian skin and white hair that falls in tangled locks past narrow shoulders. But where the body should end at the waist, where legs should extend downward in humanoid fashion, there instead sprawls the massive abdomen and 8 jointed legs of a monstrous spider. This creature, this fusion of elf and arachnid that should not exist, turns luminous red eyes toward you. Those eyes hold intelligence, awareness, and beneath both, an ocean of pain that no mortal was meant to endure. You have encountered a drider, and in that moment, you understand that some fates are worse than death. The drider represents perhaps the cruelest punishment in all the Underdark, a transformation imposed by the demon goddess Lolt upon drow, who fail her in some fundamental way. To understand driders, one must first understand the role of testing in drow society and the theological framework that makes such transformations possible. The drow worship Lolt, the demon queen of spiders, who demands absolute devotion and constant proof of worthiness from her followers. Drow society operates as a brutal meritocracy where the strong rise and the weak perish, all under Lolt's watchful gaze. High-ranking drow, particularly priestesses who serve Lolt directly, undergo a trial called the Test of Lolt when they reach certain levels of power, where the goddess judges their performance, their ambition, and their continued utility. When a drow fails this test but survives it, Lolt may pass a specific judgment. Most failures result in death, swift and final. But for certain individuals, those who show particular promise despite their failure, or whose continued existence might serve some purpose in Lolt's plans, the goddess offers a different fate. She transforms them, melding their drow form with that of a spider in a process that requires the presence of a Yachlal, one of Lolt's handmaiden demons. The transformation process is agonizing, as Lolt's power channels through the demon to reshape the drow's body. The victim remains fully conscious throughout, experiencing every moment as their lower body elongates and restructures into the form of a giant spider. The physical form of a drider combines the upper torso, arms, and head of a drow with the lower body and legs of a giant spider. The transition point typically occurs at the waist, where drow flesh flows seamlessly into chitinous spider abdomen. This abdomen spans roughly 6 to 8 feet in length and stands about 4 feet off the ground, supported by 8 powerful legs that end in sharp points capable of gripping stone and climbing vertical surfaces. The entire spider portion displays a dark coloration, usually black or deep purple, sometimes marked with patterns that might echo designs the drow bore before transformation. The legs possess remarkable strength, allowing driders to carry substantial weight and move with surprising speed despite their bulk. The drow portion of a drider's anatomy retains most of its original appearance, though the transformation brings certain changes. The eyes often shift to a brighter, more luminous crimson. The hands may develop slightly elongated fingers that aid in climbing. The mouth can open wider than any humanoid jaw should allow, revealing teeth capable of delivering venomous bites. This modification serves a practical purpose, as driders develop venom glands that produce a toxin capable of sapping victims' strength and paralyzing them for up to 20 minutes. They can deliver this venom through a bite or coat their weapons with it for additional lethality. The physical changes, however devastating, pale in comparison to the psychological impact of the transformation. The newly created drider retains all memories, all knowledge, all sense of identity from their life as a drow. They remember their house, their position, their accomplishments, and their ambitions. But now they inhabit a body that marks them as failures in Lolt's eyes. Every movement feels alien. Walking requires 8 legs to coordinate rather than 2. The center of balance has shifted dramatically. Physical needs have changed, including a disturbing requirement. Driders must consume blood at least once every 4 days, or their bodies begin to deteriorate, eventually leading to death if the need remains unmet. This bloodthirst adds another layer of horror to their existence. The psychological trauma extends beyond mere body dysmorphia. Driders develop what can only be described as a death wish. The combination of shame, hatred toward those who rejected them, and the fundamental wrongness of their existence makes most driders long for death in battle. They prefer to die fighting drow specifically, seeing such an end as a final act of defiance, or perhaps revenge, against the society that cast them out. This death wish, combined with their generally unstable mental state, makes driders fearless in combat. They struggle to feel fear in the conventional sense, charging into situations that would send other creatures fleeing. Drow society compounds the psychological damage through systematic and absolute rejection. A drider cannot return to their former house or position. The transformation marks them as failures in Lolt's eyes, and association with failures brings contamination to the living. Family members disavow Driders immediately, often erasing all records of their existence. Friends and allies turn away without acknowledgement. The Drider's name becomes unspoken, their accomplishments forgotten, their very existence reduced to a cautionary tale whispered as warning. This social death, this total erasure from the community that defined the Drider's entire life, often proves more devastating than the physical transformation. The newly created Drider faces banishment from Drow cities. They are driven into the wild regions of the Underdark, left to survive as best they can. Some Driders do not survive this initial period. The trauma of transformation and rejection proves too much, and they simply stop fighting for survival. Others lash out in rage, attacking anything they encounter until something stronger kills them. But many eventually adapt to their new existence. They learn to hunt with their changed body. They discover advantages their spider form provides, and they begin building new identities, however painful, separate from the Drow culture that rejected them. Despite their exile, Driders sometimes position themselves near the fringes of Drow cities. The Drow tolerate this presence for several reasons. First, Driders serve as visible reminders of Lolt's will and the consequences of failure. Second, they function as buffers and guardians, killing potential intruders before they reach the city proper. The Drow do not welcome these Driders back, but they acknowledge their utility. However, Drow have repeatedly demonstrated willingness to betray and kill Driders once they have served their purpose, a pattern that has taught surviving Driders to take precautions when dealing with their former kin. Combat capabilities remain substantial following transformation, and in some ways even improve. The spider body provides superior mobility on vertical surfaces and rough terrain. Driders can climb walls and traverse ceilings, though they cannot walk upside down on ceilings as true spiders can. Their weight makes such inverted movement impossible. The 8 legs provide stability and can serve as weapons themselves, each ending in a point sharp enough to pierce armor. In combat, a Drider can strike with weapons while using its legs for additional attacks, creating a multi-pronged assault difficult to defend against. Not all Driders possess the same abilities regarding webbing. Approximately half of all Driders retain or develop the ability to spin webs like giant spiders. Those with this capability can create webs up to 10 times per day, producing sticky strands that function much like magical ropes of entanglement. These webs prove dangerous to everyone except the Drider that created them. Driders without web spinning abilities often associate with giant spiders or seek out areas with existing webs they can traverse freely. As all Driders can move across webbing without becoming stuck, many Driders retain the magical abilities they possessed as Drow. and some find these powers enhanced rather than diminished. Former priestesses continue to receive spells, a paradox that confuses many scholars. Why would Lolt empower beings she has marked as failures? The answer appears to lie in the goddess's nature. She values power and efficacy above sentiment. A Drider who continues to spread fear, eliminate Lolt's enemies, and demonstrate the consequences of failure, still serves her purposes regardless of their degraded status. The Drider's ability to cast spells from domains such as chaos, destruction, evil, and trickery remains intact. Wizard Driders find their arcane abilities similarly preserved, sometimes discovering that transformation unlocked previously dormant potential. All Driders possess certain innate magical abilities regardless of their prior training. They can cast spells such as dancing lights, darkness, fairy fire, detect magic, and levitate once per day each. These abilities essentially mirror those of powerful drow, a fact that some have used to manipulate Driders by claiming they remain blessed by Lolt despite their transformation. Such manipulation rarely succeeds for long, as Driders understand their true status too well to believe comfortable lies. The venom produced by Drider bites operates by sapping the strength of victims and inducing paralysis. The affected creature feels their muscles growing weak, their movements becoming sluggish, until finally they cannot move at all while remaining fully conscious and aware. This paralysis typically lasts up to 20 minutes, during which the Drider can feed, drag the victim elsewhere, or simply observe. Driders themselves possess immunity to all poisons, another adaptation that aids their survival in the Underdark's toxic environment. Despite their exile from drow society, Driders rarely form their own lasting communities. They are typically found living in solitude, the shame and pain of their condition making extended social contact unbearable. When multiple Driders do occupy the same territory, they usually exist as individuals, maintaining separate lairs, rather than as a cohesive group. Occasionally, Driders are encountered in pairs, suggesting that some find temporary companionship with others who share their curse. More commonly, a Drider might associate with a group of 7 to 12 giant monstrous spiders, creatures that accept the Drider without judgment and respond to its commands. These spider companions provide both company and tactical support during hunts. The daily existence of a Drider revolves around hunting for blood and meat, maintaining their lair, and the careful practice of whatever skills they carried from their former lives. Some Driders become master strategists, using their knowledge of tactics to set elaborate ambushes. Others focus on magical research, pursuing studies that drow society would consider too dangerous or heretical. A few become philosophers of sorts, pondering questions about identity, transformation, and divine cruelty. These intellectual pursuits provide structure to lives that might otherwise devolve into mindless predation. They allow Driders to retain the sense of being people rather than mere monsters, even as society proclaims otherwise. Reproduction proves impossible for Driders, as the transformation leaves them sexless and sterile. Lolt deliberately designed this aspect of the curse to ensure that Driders cannot found new races or dynasties. Their line ends with them, preventing any possibility of Drider societies that might challenge Drow dominance. This sterility represents yet another form of punishment, denying Driders any legacy beyond their own tormented existence. The relationship between Driders and Drow remains complex and bitter. Drow encountering Driders in the Underdark typically attack on sight, or if the Drider seems powerful, negotiate cautiously while planning betrayal. Driders harbor intense hatred toward Drow society, while simultaneously craving the acceptance they know will never come. Some Driders become raiders, specifically targeting Drow caravans and outposts to steal supplies and inflict casualties. Others position themselves along routes between Drow cities, demanding tribute from passing merchants in exchange for safe passage. A few offer their services as mercenaries, trading their combat abilities for payment. Though they approach such arrangements with extreme wariness, given Drow tendencies toward betrayal. Occasionally, a Drow house will deliberately maintain secret contact with Driders who originated from their ranks. These relationships exist in shadow, never acknowledged publicly, but leveraged for advantage. The Drider might serve as an expendable assassin, eliminating rivals in ways that cannot be traced back to the house. They might act as scouts, mapping dangerous regions that other Drow refuse to enter. They might even conduct negotiations with other Underdark races on matters the house prefers to keep quiet. In return, the house provides equipment, information, and limited protection from other threats. These arrangements benefit both parties, but remain fundamentally exploitative, with the Drider receiving scraps, while the house gains deniable assets. Accounts describe various specialized forms of Driders beyond the standard transformation, though whether these represent distinct creation methods or individual variations remains unclear. Some reports mention Drider Fanglords, exceptionally powerful specimens with enhanced combat abilities. Others describe Drider Shadow Spinners, creatures with abilities related to darkness and shadow magic. Based on what we know of Lolt's transformations, it seems reasonable to infer that she might customize each Drider to reflect the specific nature of their failure. A warrior who failed through cowardice might become a Drider with reduced offensive capabilities. A priestess who showed insufficient devotion might transform into a version with enhanced bloodthirst. If this theory holds true, then no two Driders are exactly alike, each representing a unique combination of punishment tailored to their individual failures. The transformation can theoretically be reversed, but only through the most powerful magic. A wish spell can undo what Lolt has wrought, restoring the Drider to full drow form. Such magic remains extraordinarily rare and expensive, far beyond the reach of most Driders. Some tales speak of Driders who made pacts with powerful devils or archfey, trading their souls or service for restoration. Other stories describe ancient rituals or lost artifacts capable of reversing the transformation. Whether any of these methods actually work remains a matter of speculation, though the stories persist among Driders, offering a glimmer of hope, however faint. The existence of Driders serves multiple purposes in drow society beyond simple punishment. They remind all drow of the price of failure, creating constant pressure that drives ambition and loyalty. They provide scapegoats onto which drow can project their own fears of inadequacy. They create a category of beings lower than even the lowliest drow slave, which reinforces social hierarchies. And they offer proof of Lolt's power and attention, demonstrating that the goddess actively monitors and judges her followers. In this sense, every Drider is a living sermon about obedience and consequence, a theological statement that walks on 8 legs through the darkness. For those who encounter Driders, whether as enemies or unlikely allies, certain facts remain constant. Driders are dangerous, combining drow intelligence with enhanced physical capabilities and potent magical abilities. They are unpredictable, driven by a mixture of rage, despair, and death wish that makes their actions difficult to anticipate. They are tragic, victims of a system that demanded perfection and punished anything less with unthinkable transformation. And they are survivors, creatures that have endured both physical and psychological trauma that would destroy weaker beings. You face the Drider in that web-choked passage, and in its eyes, you see the reflection of choices made and prices paid. The creature speaks, its voice carrying the melodic accent of drow aristocracy, incongruous with its monstrous form. It offers you a choice: turn back and leave its territory, or press forward and face the consequences. You hesitate, weighing options, and in that moment the Drider laughs, a bitter, broken sound that echoes off stone walls. It knows what you will choose. It knows what you must choose. And perhaps, given its death wish, it welcomes what comes next. Section 4, the Flumph. You choose to retreat from the Drider's territory, deciding that discretion serves you better than valor in this instance. The passage winds onward, taking you through chambers that gradually shift in character. The oppressive weight of drow influence fades. The webs thin and disappear. The air, while still carrying the mineral taste of deep earth, somehow feels cleaner here, less tainted by malice and ancient cruelty. You notice something else as well. A faint luminescence ahead, not the harsh magical light that drow favor, but a gentle, organic glow that pulses with the rhythm of living things. As you round a corner, you encounter a sight so unexpected, so utterly at odds with everything the Underdark represents, that you stop and stare in wonder. Floating before you, hovering perhaps 5 feet off the ground, drifts a creature that resembles nothing so much as a luminescent jellyfish adapted for air rather than water. Its body forms a rough disc about 2 feet in diameter, colored in pale shades of cream, and pink that glow with soft bioluminescence. Beneath this disc hang numerous tentacles, each waving gently as if moved by currents that you cannot feel. 2 eye stalks, each about 6 inches long, extend from the top of its body, swiveling to regard you from different angles. And then, without words or sound, you feel a presence touch your mind. Not invasive or hostile, but gentle, almost apologetic, as if asking permission before entering. You have encountered a flump, and in that moment, you realize that not everything in the Underdark seeks your death. The flump stands as perhaps the greatest anomaly in Underdark ecology, a creature of genuine goodness and benevolent intention, existing in an environment defined by cruelty and predation. Their very existence poses questions that scholars struggle to answer. How did such creatures come to live in the deep places? Why do they remain when they possess the ability to drift to the surface, where their peaceful nature would face less constant threat? What purpose do they serve in the brutal calculus of Underdark survival? The answers, when they can be determined at all, reveal a species far more complex and purposeful than their gentle appearance suggests. The physical form of a flump appears almost comically unthreatening compared to the horrors that surround them. The main body, shaped like a flat saucer, spans approximately 2 feet in diameter. The thickness measures about 3 to 4 inches at the center, tapering to roughly 1 inch at the edges. The body appears hollow, with a small circular opening at the center of the top surface. The texture resembles soft leather, with a slight translucence that allows vague shapes of internal structures to show through if examined closely. The coloration varies between individuals, with most displaying pale yellows, creams, or pinks, though some specimens show light blues or greens. The intensity of their bioluminescence shifts with their emotional state, growing brighter when excited or frightened, and dimming when calm or contemplative. The eye stalks, 2 in number, and positioned on either side of the central opening, provide excellent vision in both darkness and light. These stalks can move independently of one another, allowing the flumph to observe its surroundings in all directions simultaneously. Unlike the eyes of most Underdark creatures, flumph eyes appear expressive and almost humanoid in their quality, creating an impression of intelligence and awareness. The tentacles, numbering anywhere from 8 to 16, depending on the individual, hang from the underside of the body. They provide tactile sensation, allowing flumphs to manipulate small objects with surprising dexterity. The tentacles also secrete a mild acid, though the creatures use this capability reluctantly and only in self-defense. The method by which flumphs achieve and maintain flight involves drawing air into the opening at the center of their top surface and expelling it through small holes in their underside and apertures along the rim of their body. This creates both lift and propulsion, allowing them to float constantly at a height of 4 to 6 inches above the ground and fly at speeds that belie their gentle nature. The air circulation produces a characteristic whistling sound, which can only be heard in quiet areas and creates a gentle breeze. This sound, a soft flumph noise, gave the creatures their common name. The flumph cannot choose to stop floating, as this process operates automatically like breathing in other creatures. Even in sleep, they hover in place, perhaps drifting slowly with air currents, but never falling. The telepathic abilities of flumphs extend far beyond simple communication. They can project their thoughts to any creature within 60 feet, regardless of whether that creature possesses the ability to reciprocate. Flumphs understand Undercommon, but cannot speak it or any other language verbally, making telepathy their only means of communication. More remarkably, flumphs can perceive the content of any telepathic communication used within 60 feet of them, essentially eavesdropping on the mental conversations of others. They also possess the ability to sense the surface thoughts and emotional states of beings around them, though they cannot read minds deeply without consent. This passive telepathy operates constantly, feeding the flumph a steady stream of information about the mental landscape surrounding them. In the Underdark, where violent emotions and dark thoughts occur constantly, this sensory input could overwhelm most creatures. Flumphs endure it through a combination of mental discipline and an unusual dietary adaptation. They feed primarily on psionic energy, particularly the emissions generated by strong emotions and mental activity. Fear, anger, pain, and despair all produce psionic residue that flumphs can absorb and metabolize. In environments like the Underdark, where creatures constantly experience intense emotions, flumphs find abundant nutrition. They drift through caverns, absorbing this psychic pollution, essentially cleaning up mental energy that would otherwise accumulate. However, feeding on evil thoughts proves deeply unpleasant for these good-aligned creatures, causing them something akin to nausea or disgust. When flumphs encounter good-aligned creatures, they approach eagerly, drawn by the opportunity to feed on positive mental energy for a change. They find the thoughts of kind, compassionate beings far more nourishing and pleasant than the twisted emanations they typically subsist on. This preference explains why flumphs often seek out and befriend adventurers entering the Underdark from the surface. Beyond the dietary benefit, flumphs genuinely enjoy interaction with good creatures, finding their presence comforting in the darkness. The diet of flumphs extends beyond pure psionic energy, however. They also hunt small vermin such as rats, lizards, and frogs. Their hunting method involves floating 1 to 2 feet higher than normal, then dropping suddenly onto their prey. The impact stuns the victim while the flumph's tentacles wrap around it, holding it in place while the mild acid begins breaking down its tissues. The flumph then absorbs nutrients through its tentacles over the course of several minutes. This hunting behavior typically targets creatures smaller than the flumph itself, as larger prey might escape or fight back effectively. Social structure among flumph centers on communities called cloisters that typically consist of 12 to 32 individuals. These cloisters occupy territories they defend not through violence, but through careful positioning and strategic retreat. Flumphs prefer chambers with high ceilings and multiple exits, locations that allow them to float safely while maintaining escape routes if necessary. Within a cloister, organization follows a monastic pattern. The group is led by an abbot, a flumph of greater power and wisdom than typical members. The abbot is assisted by priors, who comprise about 1/6 of the cloister's population. The remaining members are called monks, and all share knowledge and contribute according to their abilities. The monastic flumphs, particularly abbots and priors, possess the ability to cast divine spells similar to clerics. They worship benevolent deities whose identities remain unknown to humanoid races, gods of light and goodness, whose influence extends even into the Underdark's depths. These spell-casting flumphs display coloration distinct from their albino cousins, showing soft gold or yellow hues rather than pure white. They use their magic to protect the cloister, heal injured members, and occasionally aid friendly creatures they encounter. Communication within a flumph cloister operates at levels of complexity that surface dwellers struggle to comprehend. Through constant telepathic contact, cloister members share not merely thoughts, but complete sensory experiences, emotional states, and abstract concepts. A flumph that encounters something unusual can transmit the entire experience to its cloister mates instantaneously, allowing them to understand not just what happened, but how it felt and what it meant. This level of communication creates a collective awareness that enhances the cloister's ability to make decisions and respond to threats. Individual autonomy remains intact, however. Flumphs are not a hive mind, but rather individuals choosing to share experiences for mutual benefit. The philosophical outlook that flumphs embrace strikes many as impossibly naive given their environment. They believe fundamentally in the worth and potential goodness of all conscious beings. They hold that evil results from circumstance, trauma, and flawed thinking, rather than from inherent nature. They maintain hope that even corrupt creatures can change if shown kindness and given opportunity. These beliefs would be admirable among surface-dwelling scholars debating ethics in comfortable libraries. Holding such convictions while living among mind flayers, drow, and aboleths seems almost delusional. Yet flumphs persist in these principles, arguing that abandoning hope and goodness in the face of evil means allowing that evil to claim victory. This philosophical stance manifests practically through the role that flumphs have carved out for themselves as information brokers and neutral observers. They drift through the Underdark, listening to telepathic communications, overhearing conversations, and observing events that more powerful creatures wish to keep secret. Flumphs compile this information carefully, creating mental archives of knowledge about territorial boundaries, political alliances, planned attacks, hidden treasures, and countless other facts. They then share this information selectively with those who prove trustworthy, typically using it to prevent violence, warn innocent creatures of danger, or subtly guide events toward better outcomes. A flumph might warn travelers of drow raiders waiting in ambush, not out of loyalty to the travelers, but to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. They might reveal to adventurers the location of a mind flayer outpost, knowing that its destruction will save future victims from seramorphosis. Other Underdark inhabitants react to flumphs, with attitudes ranging from amused tolerance to active protection. Mind flayers generally ignore them, viewing their weak psychic abilities and limited intelligence as beneath notice. The Illithids occasionally study flumphs, curious about their unusual diet and telepathic capabilities. But such incidents occur infrequently enough that cloisters can exist near mind flayer settlements for years. The flumphs feed on the abundant psionic energy generated by Illithid activities while staying carefully out of direct contact. Beholders display more variance in their responses. Some consider flumphs irritating gossips that spread information the beholders wish concealed. Others appreciate their role as information gatherers and deliberately protect flumph cloisters in their territory. Drow reactions split along ideological lines. followers of Lolt view flumphs as weak and pathetic creatures, sometimes using them for target practice or cruel entertainment. Followers of Ilustri, the drow goddess of song, moonlight, and redemption, often establish protective relationships with local cloisters, seeing in the flumphs a reflection of their own struggle to maintain goodness in darkness. Githyanki, by contrast, harbor intense hatred for flumphs and attack them on sight. The reasons for this violent antipathy remain unclear, though it may stem from the flumph's ability to eavesdrop on telepathic communications, making them security risks to Githyanki operations. The most consistently positive relationships that flumphs develop occur with Sverfneblin communities. Deep gnomes appreciate the flumph's peaceful nature, value their willingness to share information, and respect their philosophical commitment to good in a dark world. Many Sverfneblin settlements include resident flumph cloisters that live in specially prepared chambers near the community's heart. These flumphs serve as advisors, warn of approaching threats, and provide emotional support through their empathic abilities. In return, the gnomes protect them from predators and treat them as respected community members. Some of the longest-lasting alliances in Underdark history involve Sverfneblin cities and their associated flumph cloisters, partnerships that have endured for centuries. Interestingly, some cloisters have even recruited mind witnesses, rogue beholder kin that separated from the hive mind, integrating them into their communities and helping shift their alignment toward good. Reproduction among flumphs follows a straightforward biological process. Approximately once every 2 years, an adult flumph undergoes budding, where 1 to 8 tiny younglings sprout from its underside. These offspring remain attached to the parent for about 3 months, during which they grow to approximately 2 inches in diameter. At that point, they detach and become fully independent, though they remain with the cloister. The young flumphs then grow to full adult size over the course of 1 additional month. This rapid maturation allows flumph populations to recover relatively quickly from losses, though their peaceful nature and vulnerability to predators mean that mortality rates can be high. The lifespan of a flumph extends approximately 20 years under normal circumstances. As flumphs age, they accumulate knowledge and wisdom, becoming valuable repositories of information for their cloisters. The oldest members, those selected to serve as abbots or priors, possess not just age, but demonstrated wisdom and stronger connections to whatever deities the flumphs worship. When a flumph dies, the cloister mourns briefly through shared telepathic experience, then continues its existence. Flumphs accept death as a natural part of the cycle, showing neither excessive grief nor fear. The defensive capabilities of flumphs, while limited compared to typical Underdark predators, prove more effective than initial appearances suggest. When threatened, a flump can spray a foul-smelling liquid from its body. This stench spray releases in a cone-shaped area up to 15 feet, coating anyone caught in the blast. The smell proves so horrible that coated creatures become poisoned, suffering nausea and discomfort. Worse, anyone within 5 feet of a coated creature also becomes poisoned by the lingering stench. The effect lasts for several hours and can only be removed by bathing thoroughly in water, alcohol, or vinegar. This defensive mechanism often proves sufficient to drive off casual predators, giving the flump time to flee. Beyond the stench spray, flumps employ their acidic tentacles in combat if absolutely necessary. The acid secreted through their tentacles causes recurring damage that persists for several seconds after initial contact, burning through flesh and equipment. While not immediately lethal, the acid proves painful enough to discourage most attackers. Flumps can also emit bursts of light by increasing their bioluminescence suddenly, potentially blinding creatures accustomed to darkness. These defenses work best when combined with the flump's primary strategy of avoiding combat altogether through careful observation and strategic positioning. One significant vulnerability affects all flumps. Due to their body shape and flight mechanics, they become almost completely helpless if turned upside down. A flump knocked prone has a 50% chance of landing upside down, at which point it becomes incapacitated. The creature can attempt to right itself through great effort, but until it succeeds, it remains vulnerable to any attack. This weakness makes flumps cautious about engaging in melee combat or entering situations where they might be knocked from the air. The origins of flumps remain shrouded in mystery and speculation. Some scholars propose they evolved naturally in the Underdark, perhaps as specialized feeders on the abundant psionic energy found in deep places. Others suggest they arrived from another plane of existence, or even another world entirely. One popular theory holds that flumps are distantly related to grells, another aberrant floating creature, based on certain physiological similarities and their shared anti-gravity abilities. Some sages believe flumps may have traveled to various worlds as stowaways aboard Grell Spelljammer ships. The flumps themselves, when asked about their origins, typically respond that such questions matter less than how they live in the present. Flumps inhabit various Underdark regions throughout the world. Cloisters have been documented in regions beneath major surface cities, in the Wormerthings, in levels of Undermountain, and in countless other subterranean locations. During periods of widespread evil, such as the demonic madness that permeated the Underdark during the Rage of Demons, flumps suffer greatly from the constant exposure to malevolent thoughts. Some cloisters responded by offering assistance to anyone opposing the source of evil, while others maintained that kindness and compassion represent the only appropriate responses during dark times. The relationship between flumphs and adventurers entering the Underdark from the surface deserves special attention, as such encounters often prove pivotal for both parties. Flumphs recognize that surface dwellers generally lack the deep corruption that characterizes many Underdark natives. They approach adventuring parties cautiously, but hopefully, offering information, guidance, and sometimes direct assistance. A flumph might warn adventurers about a roper positioned along their intended route, suggest safe paths through dangerous territory, or reveal the location of potable water sources. These aids have saved countless lives over the centuries, though few surface dwellers realize how much they owe to these strange, floating benefactors. Some adventurers form lasting friendships with flumphs they encounter, returning to the Underdark, specifically to visit particular individuals or cloisters. These relationships provide flumphs with information about surface culture, news about world events, and occasionally items or knowledge unavailable in the deep places. Such friendships remain rare, but demonstrate the potential for genuine cross-species bonds, even in the Underdark's harsh environment. You stand in that luminous chamber, the flumph floating patiently before you, and feel its gentle presence in your mind. It shows you a mental map of passages ahead, warning you of a roper positioned along the route you intended to take. It suggests an alternate path, longer but safer, that will bring you to your destination without unnecessary danger. And it asks nothing in return except that you remember this encounter, that you tell others about the glowing creatures who offer help in dark places, and that perhaps, sometime in the future, you might extend similar kindness to someone who needs it. The request seems small, impossibly optimistic, given the cruelty you have witnessed in these depths. Yet looking into those expressive eye stalks, feeling the genuine warmth of the flumph's thoughts, you find yourself agreeing. Goodness exists even here, in the last place anyone would expect to find it. And perhaps in a world of darkness, such small lights matter most of all. Section 5. The Rust Monster. Following the flumph's guidance, you take the alternate route through passages that wind downward at a gentle slope. The terrain changes again, the smooth stone of worked tunnels giving way to rougher, more natural formations. Old mining operations left their marks here. Ancient excavations from some forgotten era, when dwarves or duergar sought precious metals in these depths. Broken tools litter the ground, their metal components reduced to orange flakes and rust stains. Support beams have collapsed, their iron reinforcements corroded to nothing. You notice something else as well. A peculiar smell hangs in the air musty and metallic, reminiscent of oxidized iron, but with an organic undertone that suggests living processes rather than simple decay. Movement catches your eye in the shadows ahead. Something scuttles across the passage floor with an insect-like gait, propelled by multiple legs that click against stone. The creature stands roughly 4 feet tall at its highest point, with a body about 5 feet long that resembles an oversized armadillo, or perhaps a prehistoric crustacean. Its hide displays a mottled yellowish-brown coloration with rust-red tones that help it blend with the corroded metal fragments that carpet this area. 2 long antennae extend from its head, waving through the air as if tasting it, searching for something specific. The tail arches over its back like that of a scorpion, ending in a peculiar paddle or propeller-shaped structure. As the creature's small eyes turn in your direction, those antennae begin to quiver with excitement. It has detected the metal of your weapons, your armor, your buckles and clasps, and all the countless iron objects that you carry without thinking. You have encountered a rust monster, and suddenly, every piece of equipment you own has become a liability. The rust monster represents one of the Underdark's most unique predators, dangerous not through fangs or claws or venom, but through its peculiar diet and the specialized biology that supports it. These creatures feed exclusively on metal, particularly iron and its alloys, though they consume other ferrous metals as well when their preferred food proves available. They do not simply scrape or chew metal like a normal animal gnawing bone. Instead, rust monsters possess the ability to oxidize metal rapidly through contact with their antennae, reducing worked iron to worthless rust in seconds. A sword that took a master smith months to forge becomes flaking powder when a rust monster's antennae brush against it. Armor that cost a fortune and saved your life a dozen times crumbles to orange dust at the creature's touch. The physical form of a rust monster combines elements from various arthropods in ways that create a distinctive appearance. The body measures approximately 5 feet from head to tail, though individual specimens vary in size. The main body sits relatively low to the ground, supported by 4 pairs of legs that end in clawed feet capable of gripping stone. The legs possess a structure that prevents the rust monster from accidentally corroding its own limbs when it walks across metal surfaces. The hide consists of overlapping plates that provide protection, with coloration ranging from yellowish browns to rust reds, depending on the individual's diet and age. The head of a rust monster appears relatively small compared to its body, featuring simple eyes that provide basic vision. The creature relies far more heavily on its other senses than on sight. The most distinctive features are the 2 antennae that extend from just above the mouth. Each antenna reaches 2 to 3 feet in length when fully extended, flexible yet capable of becoming rigid when necessary. The tips contain specialized organs that detect metal through what appears to be an electromagnetic sense, essentially allowing the rust monster to taste the presence of ferrous metals in its environment. In 5th edition accounts, this sense operates effectively within 30 feet, though older records suggest they could detect metal from distances up to 90 feet under optimal conditions. The tail that curves over the rust monster's back ends in that distinctive paddle or propeller-shaped structure that gives the creature a unique silhouette. Some naturalists who have studied these creatures propose that this structure plays a role in the rust monster's metabolism, possibly helping process air or regulate the chemical reactions that allow it to rust metal. The exact function remains a matter of scholarly debate, as studying rust monsters closely enough to determine such details proves challenging, given their tendency to consume research equipment. The oxidization ability that defines rust monsters operates through biological processes that scholars struggle to explain fully. The antennae secrete a compound that acts as an extremely powerful oxidizing agent, far more effective than anything occurring naturally in normal chemistry. When this secretion contacts ferrous metal, it triggers a reaction that spreads through the material at remarkable speed. The metal does not simply rust, as it would over years of exposure to moisture and air. Instead, the entire structure loses cohesion rapidly, transforming from solid metal to fragile oxide that crumbles easily. The process generates heat as a byproduct, making corroded items noticeably warm immediately after a rust monster's touch. One theory about how this ability functions, documented in scholarly texts from 3rd edition sources, suggests that rust monsters process air through their paddle tails, extracting carbon dioxide and converting it to pure oxygen within their bodies. Tiny nodules across their antennae and body then eject this concentrated oxygen along with some form of catalytic agent that accelerates oxidation beyond natural rates. This would explain how rust monsters can affect even metals that normally resist corrosion. Whether this theory accurately describes the mechanism or represents educated speculation remains unclear, as the internal biology of rust monsters has not been thoroughly documented. Different metals resist this oxidization to varying degrees based on their composition. Iron and steel, the most common materials for weapons and armor, succumb almost immediately. A single touch from a rust monster's antenna can destroy such items completely, or at minimum, weaken them significantly through cumulative damage. Current understanding suggests that non-magical metal weapons take progressive damage from repeated contact, accumulating penalties until they become useless. Magical weapons and armor, protected by enchantments, resist the effect entirely according to recent accounts. Though older records describe magical items succumbing eventually to determined rust monsters, the discrepancy may reflect changes in how magic interacts with the creature's abilities, or possibly regional variations in rust monster potency. Mithril and adamantine, despite being ferrous metals, do appear in accounts of rust monster feeding, suggesting these materials are not immune to their abilities. However, the exact susceptibility of such exotic metals varies across different sources. Stone, wood, leather, and organic materials do not interest rust monsters and remain unaffected by their antennae, making equipment crafted from such substances the safest choice when traveling through rust monster territory. The diet and feeding behavior of rust monsters reveal creatures perfectly adapted to their ecological niche. They consume the oxidized metal they create, using their mouths to gather rust particles and draw them into their digestive system. The metabolism breaks down these oxides, extracting metal content and whatever trace nutrients might be present. Based on what we can infer from observations of their feeding habits, a rust monster likely requires several pounds of metal per week to maintain health, though they can survive on less during lean periods by slowing their metabolism and reducing activity. Hunting strategies among rust monsters demonstrate intelligence somewhat above pure instinct, despite their limited mental capacity. With intelligence comparable to that of simple animals, they nonetheless show capacity for basic assessment and decision-making. A rust monster detecting metal through its antennae will approach the source, prioritizing larger concentrations over smaller ones. They prefer refined, worked metal over raw ore, possibly because the former provides better nutrition or easier consumption. When approaching potential meals, rust monsters use their surprising speed, capable of moving at 40 feet per round, to close distance quickly before prey can react. The combat behavior of a rust monster focuses on accessing metal rather than harming creatures directly. The creature possesses a weak bite that can inflict minor injuries, but this serves primarily as a defensive measure rather than a hunting tool. The antennae represent the rust monster's primary means of interaction, and it waves these appendages seeking contact with metal items. Warriors accustomed to relying on equipment suddenly find their swords crumbling and armor weakening, creating psychological impact that often proves as devastating as physical damage. Seasoned fighters reduced to ineffective weapons sometimes panic and flee, leaving their remaining gear behind for the rust monster to consume at leisure. Intelligence comparable to common animals means rust monsters can learn from experience to some degree. They remember locations where they found abundant metal and return to such sites regularly. They can distinguish between creatures that carry metal and those that do not, focusing their attention accordingly. Some rust monsters reportedly become tolerant of specific individuals who provide metal scraps regularly, approaching such feeders without aggression. However, attempts to fully domesticate rust monsters consistently fail. The creatures tolerate regular feeders, but form no genuine bonds, and will immediately attack any metal brought near them, regardless of past interactions. Reproduction among rust monsters follows biological patterns that have been documented in older naturalist accounts. Males and females exist as distinct sexes, with males initiating mating through production of chittering sounds that attract receptive females. The species appears to mate readily when opportunities arise. After mating, females undergo a gestation period lasting 4 to 7 months before giving birth to a single offspring. The young rust monster emerges fully formed, though much smaller than adults, immediately capable of detecting and consuming metal. Maternal care occurs for a period of several months, during which the mother teaches basic survival skills through example. After this period, the juvenile rust monster departs to establish its own territory. Sexual maturity arrives around 1 year of age, at which point young rust monsters begin producing their own chittering mating calls. The lifespan of a rust monster in the wild has not been extensively documented in available sources, though based on their size and metabolism, we might infer they live for a period measured in decades rather than centuries. Very old rust monsters develop darker, more heavily armored hides as accumulated metal consumption contributes to their protection. Whether any individual rust monsters achieve truly ancient ages remains uncertain, as their solitary nature and the hostile Underdark environment create numerous hazards that likely claim most specimens long before natural death from old age. The ecological role of rust monsters extends beyond simple predation. They serve as recyclers of metal in the Underdark's ecosystem, breaking down weapons, armor, and tools left by dead explorers, and returning those materials to forms other processes can utilize. The rust they create enriches soil in underground chambers, providing iron compounds that fungi and other organisms incorporate into their structures. Without rust monsters, the Underdark would accumulate metal debris that serves limited function in the subterranean food web. Interactions between rust monsters and other Underdark inhabitants vary based on each species' reliance on metal equipment. Mind flayers view rust monsters with disdain. The Illithids depend heavily on metal tools for their experiments and surgical procedures. A rust monster loose in an illithid colony can cause catastrophic damage before being eliminated, destroying irreplaceable implements and research equipment. Mind flayers maintain strict protocols for detecting and removing rust monsters from their territory, considering them severe enough threats to warrant immediate psionic extermination. Beholders display more tolerance as they use little metal equipment and can easily dispatch rust monsters with eye rays if necessary. Some beholders even maintain rust monsters as living traps, positioning them in passages where intruders will encounter them. Drow relationships with rust monsters prove complex. The dark elves respect the creature's ability to neutralize heavily armored opponents, and sometimes capture them for use in arenas or as specialized defenses. However, Drow also find rust monsters intensely frustrating because the creatures show no fear of Drow status or power and will happily corrode priceless ancestral weapons belonging to noble houses. Drow hunting parties targeting rust monsters employ specialized tactics, using weapons made from stone, wood, bone, or other non-metallic materials to kill the creatures while keeping metal equipment safely distant. Duergar maintain a particularly antagonistic relationship with rust monsters. The Grey Dwarves' entire culture revolves around metalworking, mining, and the creation of superior weapons and armor. To them, rust monsters represent existential threats that must be eliminated wherever encountered. Duergar settlements maintain standing bounties on rust monster antennae, paying substantial prices for proof of kills. They have developed specialized hunting techniques, including weapons and traps crafted from non-metallic materials. Despite these efforts, rust monsters persist in Duergar territory, drawn by the very metal concentrations that Duergar cities produce. The Sverfneblin, being less dependent on metal than other dwarven races, treat rust monsters with cautious tolerance rather than active hostility. Deep gnomes craft most of their tools from stone, crystal, bone, or organic materials, making rust monster encounters inconvenient rather than catastrophic. Some Sverfneblin communities deliberately maintain small rust monster populations in outlying caverns, using them as passive defenses against raiders who rely on metal arms and armor. Surface world adventurers entering the Underdark often learn about rust monsters through devastating encounters that leave them nearly defenseless. Experienced delvers develop strategies for dealing with these creatures, carrying backup weapons made from non-metallic materials, wearing armor with leather or hide outer layers that rust monsters ignore, and preparing ranged attacks that work without metal components. Some adventuring companies employ scouts whose job involves probing ahead with disposable metal items, deliberately attracting any rust monsters before the main party commits to a passage. Variants of the standard rust monster have been reported in isolated regions, though documentation remains limited. Accounts from 3rd edition sources describe environmental adaptations, including frostfell rust monsters that inhabit frozen regions and destroy metal through extreme cold rather than oxidation, causing it to become brittle and shatter. Waste rust monsters allegedly inhabit desert environments and transform metal into sand through some alternative process. Whether these represent distinct subspecies, individual mutations, or simply regional adaptations of standard rust monsters to extreme environments remains uncertain. Reliable, confirmed sightings of such variants are rare enough that some scholars question their existence entirely. One particularly intriguing legend surrounds rust monsters and their potential relationship to creatures called rust dragons. According to accounts from 2nd edition sources, extremely old rust monsters somehow journey to the plane of Acheron, where they gorge themselves on the abundant metal cubes for approximately 1 year. They then spin cocoons from metal and undergo a 3-year metamorphosis, emerging as rust dragon wormlings. This life cycle, if accurate, would make rust monsters the larval stage of a much more dangerous creature. However, this claim has been disputed by other scholars, with some sources describing the idea as implausible speculation. More recent accounts make no mention of such a relationship, leaving the truth uncertain. We can say that stories connecting rust monsters to rust dragons persist in Underdark lore. But whether they reflect actual biology or simply represent misunderstandings and folklore remains an open question. As you face the rust monster in that debris-strewn passage, understanding floods through you. This creature is not evil. It does not hate you or wish you harm. It simply hungers for the metal you carry, responding to biological imperatives as fundamental as your own need for food and water. You make a choice, carefully removing a dagger from your belt, one of your backup blades rather than your primary weapon, and tossing it toward the creature. The rust monster's antennae lock onto the falling blade immediately. It scuttles forward with surprising grace, touches its antennae to the steel, and begins feeding on the rust that blooms across the metal surface. While it eats, you edge past, keeping your remaining weapons well clear of those questing antennae. The rust monster ignores you, absorbed in its meal. You have learned an important lesson about the Underdark. Sometimes the greatest threats come not from malice, but from nature following its own strange rules. Your journey through these dark passages has shown you wonders and terrors that few surface dwellers ever witness. The cloaker lurking in shadows, patience given form and wings, the roper standing like stone, until prey wanders into reach of its grasping tendrils. The drider bearing the curse of transformation and exile, forever caught between two natures. The flumph glowing with gentle hope in lightless depths, proving that goodness persists even in darkness. And the rust monster, turning civilization's greatest achievements into its sustenance through abilities that defy simple understanding. These 5 creatures, rare and strange as they are, hint at the broader mysteries that fill the Underdark. Countless other species dwell in the deep places, most unknown to surface scholars, many undiscovered even by those who spend their lives exploring subterranean realms. The darkness keeps its secrets well, revealing them only to those brave or foolish enough to venture into its embrace. Every tunnel might lead to wonders. Every chamber might hide horrors. And every creature, no matter how bizarre its form or unsettling its abilities, plays its role in the great underground ecosystem that exists parallel to the surface world, yet completely separate from it. The Underdark challenges every assumption you brought from the sunlit lands above. Here, stone moves and hungers. Here, punishment takes physical form that walks on 8 legs. Here, jellyfish float through air instead of water, carrying wisdom and compassion into places of darkness. Here, the tools of civilization become food for creatures that exist nowhere else in all the world. Understanding these creatures means understanding that the rules change in the deep places. What works on the surface fails below. What seems impossible becomes common. What appears simple conceals complexity. Take that knowledge with you into the darkness and let it guide you safely through whatever waits in the depths. The Underdark waits, vast and mysterious, filled with creatures both terrible and wonderful. Until next time, may you remember that in the eternal night below, patience, observation, and understanding often serve better than sword and spell. Now you know 5 of its rarest inhabitants. Take that knowledge with you into the darkness and let it guide you safely through whatever waits in the depths.